From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hi, I'm Kristi Finefield, a reference librarian in the Prints and Photographs Division at the Library of Congress, the National Library for the United States.
And I'm Sam Watters, an architectural and landscape historian working for many years in the library's collection of over 15 million photographs.
America's library has a dual mission. We work hard to preserve our collections and to make their information widely available. You can visit us in Washington, D.C. in person or online at www.loc.gov/pictures. We're here to help you discover pictures. When I guide researchers in finding photographs for their topics, I'm often asked a series of questions. How do I learn about a picture? How do I know what's going on in the picture? And how do I read a photograph? This type of research skill is sometimes called visual literacy. So, I invited Sam to talk with us today about his top tips for learning about the story in a photograph. By his own estimate, he's looked at more than 500,000 photos while writing about American life and culture over the last 10 years or so. His most recent book relied on many library collections to reveal new ideas about an important era in U.S. history. It's called Gardens for a Beautiful America, Photographs by Frances Benjamin Johnston. So Sam, tell me a little bit about Frances Benjamin Johnston, just a touch about her life.
Frances Benjamin Johnston became a professional photographer just after the Civil War. She lived in Washington, D.C., and she had a long 60-year career.
Wow, okay.
And she succeeded in this career because she mastered several different kinds of photography in a period when there was a proliferation of printed photography in America.
Miss Johnston, she left her archive to the Library of Congress, which is one of the reasons that you came to the library, I think. We have a vast collection here at the library of her work, but we also have this small group that you ran across of just over 1,100 unidentified, misidentified, partially identified lantern slides, and that's what led you into the work for your book. Can you talk a little bit about the research you did to write the book?
Well, first I'd like to say 1,100 slides is quite a lot of slides. So
yes, it is.
This
it's
took a
small
little time.
In context.
So it was small, but many years of work.
Yes.
What I did was that because the slides were unidentified, you have no choice but then to resource and consider alternate ways of researching photographs, because the photographs are not going to tell you out of the box what they are. So you have to go through many collections, and many of them are here in the library that you can use to research that kind of material.
So it's real detective work. You really have to try a lot of different things to find those answers.
It is. There's many researchers, we all talk about this. There's both the intentional kind of research where you go and you pull the book off the shelf and you know something's going to be in it, and then there's also a great deal of good fortune that comes in researching.
So you had some good fortune, I think, working with this collection, even if it was 5 years of good
right.
fortune.
It was 5 years of a lot of work and very few days of good fortune.
So we're going to tap these wonderful images, this group of just over 1,100 lantern slides, which we'll explain in a later section. What is a lantern slide? We're going to tap them as a case study to learn the top tips for how to research and read photographs. The first part of our series is called Start to Read a Photograph. So we're going to get right into some photos. And let's say, since I'm a reference librarian, an example of a researcher that might come in the library, maybe they're interested in Newport, Rhode Island. Maybe they heard about the mansions and estates and the gardens that used to be there and maybe still are there, but primarily during the Gilded Age, the early 1900s. That's their period of interest. Can you tell me just a little bit about what Newport was like then? Why would they be interested in it?
Well, you still can go to Newport today and see what are the monuments of American Gilded Age wealth. It was a period of enormous accumulation. It was the original 1%. It was that era, and there were greatly wealthy people built enormous estates and gardens. They had houses and gardens and many, sometimes 100 servants.
Wow.
And it's a period of great wealth and of real interest to people.
Some names we might know that were
people we would know.
submarine there.
Somebody we would know is there were the Vanderbilts being the leaders of the pack. But there were coal executives and banking fortunes and real estate fortunes. But the Vanderbilts really are the ones that we would know today.
Okay, great. So you can see why people might be interested. People love to see how the rich,
Well,
they live.
Well, it was essentially People magazine living out in the end of the 19th
So 100
century.
years ago,
Right.
the rich and famous.
And we still can see, because the Newport's very preserved, how many of how people really lived.
Okay, so as a librarian, I help them do a little search to kind of feed their interest in Newport. And one of the boxes we pull is a box from the Frances Benjamin Johnston collection. And we're going to look closely at the images, because that is one of our first tips about how to read a photograph, is to look closely. So in the position of the researcher, I'm just going to start going through the photos. So the first one is one of these grand houses we just talked about in Newport. It says it's the Beacon Hill House. I don't see a lot else, but it is quite a house. Oh, and it has a rather grand garden going on.
Well, we don't know if that's Beacon Hill House Garden.
Oh, that's right, because we don't
It's
know if
a
this
garden.
folder is the
It's
right.
a garden.
Oh, well, ask questions, right? Make no assumptions.
Very careful here.
And another shot of the garden. Oh, and here's the poor gentleman that has to take care of the garden. Now this one is a little different. Let's stop and look at this one for a minute, because it gives me a few questions. Looking closely at him, it appears to be maybe the gardener, only guessing because of the big house and the big yard. Maybe they hire a man to work in the yard. He's pushing a lawnmower, clearly not the kind I used as a teenager, so he's definitely from this earlier time period. The yard already looks perfect, so either he just finished or he's posing with the mower. We don't know. But these are some questions I have. So what else? When you were looking at this photo, what else would you have made note of?
Well, I think that's important to look that there are these drawn lines around the picture, which suggest, A, that it's not necessarily the original picture that was intended to be printed. It may just be a proof.
Right.
I would also look at the color of the photograph. It seems to be distinctly different in tone than the photograph before
right.
here.
That's a good point.
So what is that about? Is that because this is a test print, or is it an older version of it?
Right.
Why don't we look at the
And
back
does
of
it even belong in this folder, maybe? That's
Well,
a
why don't we
question.
look at the back of this
Okay.
photograph?
So not a lot to go on. I've got R.I. Newport,
Oh, so
Newport, Rhode Island, hopefully. James Blue Garden, I think.
Right.
So not too much else.
Well, it says James, Blue Garden,
James,
not
comma.
James Blue Garden.
So not
Very
Mr.
careful.
Not Mr. Blue James.
That's right. Yeah.
Mr. James. So in your research, you actually learned quite a bit about the James, what this James refers to.
Right. So we can a few years of work. We know that in fact that house that you saw in the beginning was the estate of a man named Arthur Curtis James, and he and his wife Harriet built this house shortly after 1900. For several years, worked on the estate. They were a couple, like many of the people in Newport who came
Another
from
wealthy
New York.
couple.
They were another wealthy couple, fortune from railroad and
Wow.
mining, cattle. These are enormous fortunes. And they lived in New York City, and there had an equally grand house. We see here a remarkable photograph of their interior of that house. And it gives you some sense of how these people lived. And no surprise, they had a house in the country,
Yes.
which was, and the only place rich people really thought was the country at this time was Newport, Rhode Island. And
So it was the place to be.
this estate,
Yeah.
as you see in a photograph, that this house, this garden was associated with this estate.
Okay. So let's look at one of our second tips, actually, was to try to get answers by looking at other photographs of the same subject. So we've already looked at a little bit of Beacon Hill House, a little of the Blue Garden. We could keep going through this folder and see a few more images and think that possibly they're all the same location. But we could also seek out, by talking to the reference librarian, other collections that might include photos. So let's give an example of something we might discover. Here's another image. Going through this collection of photographs of Newport, Rhode Island, lots of different homes, but we come across another shot.
Right.
And this one is the house up close, showing a little bit a closer view of the home, and it says residence of Commodore James.
Right.
So that's quite fancy.
Well, he built a large and famous yacht that he parked down in Narragansett Bay below his house. And what you're seeing here, which is an interesting photograph, is note that there are gardeners working in the yard.
Okay.
Now, they actually look like they may be doing some work, and there's a hose, and
A little
you can
messier.
see they're actually weeding. So it's a curious contrast between the photograph you've seen before and what these two gentlemen seem to be doing.
This
So
one feels a little more candid, perhaps.
we'll talk a little bit more about the
Okay,
gardener.
Okay. So one way as a reference librarian I would get us to all these materials would be a search in the online catalog. We have a lot of records in the Prints and Photographs online catalog that would help you find images. So at this point I might turn to the online catalog to see what else I can learn. So if we do a little search in the catalog. So when I search by the same names that we've just talked about, I actually get a lot of color images. And the folder was pretty much full of black and white images, so that gives me some questions. These must be the lantern slides that I mentioned in passing, those color images you used for your book, is that right?
They are. Those are the lantern slides, and until recently we weren't able to see these lantern slides because we had to have scanning technology to be able to look at them. They're very fragile, and so now we're able to study them in a more serious and close-up way than we were in the past.
Fantastic. So we can bring together those two parts of the Johnston collection.
Right, and something for researchers to be aware of is that you always should inquire if there is a collection that is not in a box or not online.
Exactly.
It's always important to ask.
Yeah, because one thing I always tell researchers in the reading room is we have over 15 million images in our collection. We have 1.25 million or so online. There's still a big gap there, so it's important to ask the questions.
Well, now you have 1,100 more online.
That's
than you
right,
had before.
1,100 more, a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
So I think this is a great time to recap and talk about the top tips for starting to read a photograph. Look closely at the photograph, front and back. Use a magnifying glass if you need to. Describe what you see in words and take note of unusual features. Notice what's present and what's missing. And don't make assumptions. Do I really know that an actual gardener is mowing the lawn, or is it a staged illustration? And seek out all the photos you can on a subject. Each photo is another clue about the whole story. And also be aware that the photographer might be shaping that picture. Photos are not a mechanical recording of fact. To practice reading photos on your own, please go to the Every Photo is a Story website, where stimulating photos are waiting for you. Please take what you've learned and try it yourself after each part of the series. So what's coming next? I'm more curious than ever about the story behind the Blue Garden photos, the James estate, but I'll need to know a lot more to uncover that story. In the next segment, we'll talk about how to get to know the photographer and how the photos were made. We'll also explore the photographer's era and interpret the stories we discover. After all, every photo is a story waiting to be read.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.